Welcome to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond.
Welcome to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond with C. Jared Clark, owner and founder of Clark Law Group. They specialize in auto collisions, motorcycle crashes, workplace accidents, and personal injury law, and they are dedicated to helping clients every step of the way. My name is John Clements, and today's episode is Case Closed, the critical evidence that makes or breaks personal injury claims. So Jared, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you today. So to start with, can you just walk us through the types of evidence that are most critical when you're building out a successful personal injury case?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different types of evidence. Oftentimes it depends on what type of case is it, right? Sometimes you have a premises liability case that involves a slip and fall or a trip and fall, and then you got motor vehicle accidents. There are some similar ones with respect to both. One of the ones that are absolutely necessary is documentary evidence. So for example, in auto accidents, you're certainly going to want pictures of property damage to show how significant the damage was. You're also going to want, if it's a large injury like a fracture or something of that nature, you're going to want to document that objectiveness of that injury as well. And oftentimes I like to tell my clients maybe every 3 or 4 days to get another picture so it shows the rehab process and kind of what that looks like. With respect to witnesses, right, you have the documentary evidence, then you have witnesses. You have lay witnesses. You have percipient witnesses, folks who saw the accident, right, have firsthand knowledge of exactly what happened and transpired. You have the officer who may come to the scene after the fact. So there's a lot of different type of evidences, but those are some common ones with respect to motor vehicle accidents.
Okay, well, let's dig into witness statements just a little bit more because you mentioned, people who saw what happened and who have that information to provide to the courts. How do you ensure that these witnesses are properly documented and what they say is presented in court in the right way?
There's a few different ways. I always tell people you always want to have some type of investigative agency come in and conduct an investigation. For purposes for an auto accident, you're going to want law enforcement to come and do a full investigation. Although their report is not admissible in court, their personal observations and exactly what they did is admissible in court. There's this thing called hearsay, which precludes a lot of different statements from entering court. So it's important that from right after the accident or the incident, you start to make sure that stuff is documented from people who have personal knowledge. Because typically when you have personal knowledge, you could always testify to exactly what you saw. Okay, so if you don't have these different third parties coming to the scene or the scene of an accident or an incident, you could find yourself in some deep trouble when it's time to properly present that case, whether it's before a judge, an arbitrator, or a jury trial.
Okay, so I'm curious about that. If you go into maybe a little more detail about what is exactly admissible and isn't admissible when you're dealing with, maybe law enforcement interviewing a witness. Can you go into a little bit more detail, help me understand that?
Yeah, absolutely. So hearsay is known as a statement made out of court for the purpose of proving that that statement is true, right? There's reliable hearsay and there's non-reliable hearsay. And I'm not going to go through all the exceptions because there are a ton of exceptions of what could come in and what constitutes hearsay and can't come in. Officers, as long as you have personal knowledge, if you are testifying to exactly what you saw, you pretty much have free reign to go ahead and provide your opinions and your personal knowledge. One of the common exceptions to that is if it's something that requires a specialized skill training, like an expert opinion. Okay, a layperson, someone who's not trained in biomechanics or accident reconstructionists, they're not going to be able to assist the trier of fact, whether that's the jury or the judge, to opine on something that they don't know much about. Right, but officers, as long as who they spoke to, what they saw when they get to the scene, a lot of that stuff is going to be admissible.
Okay, so actually this is interesting because as someone who's not a lawyer, right, that word hearsay, it's very interesting to me because you're telling me some hearsay is admissible in court and some isn't.
That's correct.
Okay, I did not know that. I'm learning things. This is amazing.
And it's a safeguard to try to, some things are credible, some aren't. So I think really the essence of what the law is trying to capture is this statement credible? Okay, so I'll just list a couple of the exceptions. One is a statement that was made in real time or like excited utterance, right? So you see this terrible collision occur, and the first few things that come out of your mouth shortly after the incident occur, well, the law is going to consider that pretty reliable, right? It was in real time. It occurred right after, and it was this excited utterance. And there's a plethora of other different exceptions or exclusions. Anytime someone is a party to the case, well, their statement is always going to be admissible because they're a party to the case. But really, what the law is trying to get down to is how credible is this statement, right? And that's the main thing.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about that, because then it kind of puts, the idea of an expert witness versus an eyewitness testimony versus someone who maybe thinks they know something, but they really don't. And it kind of like all right covers that umbrella of is it credible? I like that.
Correct.
So let's talk about another kind of evidence that I hope would be credible. In this case, medical evidence. So, how important is medical evidence in personal injury claims?
In personal injury, medical evidence is really the cornerstone of the case. Right. There's a lot of other evidence that are important, but this is of paramount importance. And the law requires that medical providers, treaters, properly diagnose you, treat you, and then leave a track record of exactly what happened, right? And they do that in the form of their medical records and their medical bills, where they're identifying what your subjective complaints were for that particular visit. What did they diagnose you with? What treatment program did they put you on? These are all things that are required under, at least in Nevada law. There's probably a similar law in each state, but it requires experts, right? These medical professionals to provide this certain documentation. And then it gets down even a little bit more narrow where the law requires that they have certain things within their reports, okay, to make sure that both sides know exactly what testimony is going to be rendered when it comes to that. So it's not a trial by ambush per se. Okay. But the medical documentation is very important, as the clients embark on their road to recovery. The doctors are there, one, to make you feel better and get you back to what I like to call pre-incident status. But equally as important, it is to leave a track record of exactly what has happened to you. So when it's time to present that to the trier of fact later on, that's in written form.
Okay, so that kind of covers what the medical professionals need to do by law. So let's say I'm the injury victim in this case. What do I need to do to make sure this happens?
You need to make sure that you are making all of your doctor's appointments. Okay. Sadly, I can't go to court or speak to an adjuster and make the arguments that I need to make if it's not in writing. Right. I said we have to prove our claim. We have to substantiate our claim. The plaintiff or the injured victim, they have the burden of proof. So they have the burden to prove their case and all the elements of negligence against the other party. If you're not seeing the doctors, more importantly, if they're not leaving detailed notes, that is one way to certainly screw up the case and not have the proper presentation that you're going to need later on.
Okay, so definitely, yes. See your doctor. Don't skip out on your doctor. Do you need to be, keeping a file just like personally with this stuff, or is this available to your lawyers?
So I like to tell my clients, we request those at the end of the case or once the client is done treating. But I always like to tell my clients, leave like a diary, right? As you're going through in real time, because there's going to be certain things that your diary will capture that the medical records aren't, right? The doctors, they are there to, again, diagnose you, properly treat you, put you on some type of treatment plan consistent with what your prognosis is. But there's a lot of things outside the four corners of the medical records that the story is not fully told, right? And that's where the client or the victim could go ahead and kind of fill in the gaps of those to capture that big picture and things maybe that the doctor didn't ask of how this incident and or those injuries are affecting their day-to-day lives.
Okay, that's a good tip. Yeah, I feel like you're saying this from experience, like you've learned this lesson before.
I've been at it for a little bit, but it's as a young lawyer, right? I'm about a decade in now, but you learn a lot of this early, kind of just through making mistakes or not asking the right questions, or asking the right questions. But you can always dig a little deeper.
Yeah, and so I do want to dig into that because I am sure that you face common challenges anytime there's a case like this. And so let's, for example, physical evidence, such as accident photos, damaged property. What are some challenges you face when you're dealing with these kinds of cases, and how do you overcome those?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and things that we have to navigate. One of the most common ones with respect to motor vehicle accidents and property damage, adjusters and insurance companies love to cite to what's called a low impact case. And that's where the property damage, if you're just looking at it, especially from a layperson standpoint, there doesn't appear to be significant damage to the bumper or the fender or the tail lights or whatever it may be. And there is a lot of scientific peer-reviewed articles and data out there that demonstrates that there's not a direct correlation per se when it comes to simply looking at a vehicle and trying to ascertain how much energy transferred to the occupants of that vehicle to produce an injury on their neck or their spine or somewhere else on their body. But that's one of the largest hurdles that we have to overcome when it comes to an adjuster looking at the vehicle, and maybe there's some paint transfer, or there's a dent that doesn't look massive, and they immediately correlate and say no one could have been hurt who was in this vehicle. And the data, and that's just patently false.
Yeah, and so then I would guess in a case like that, you're going to turn to some kind of an expert witness to really establish what actually happened, even if the photos look like maybe to an untrained observer like something else happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's where different experts can come in, but oftentimes a biomechanical engineer, like anything, there's usually a science to things. And that's
Mhm.
where a biomechanical engineer as an expert could come in and try to ascertain the acceleration, the velocity. If the person was braking, but how much energy, what was the delta V is what they use that was transferred to the occupants of that vehicle. And they do a barrage of different tests and findings in an effort to try to find out that information, and that way no one's really speculating.
Nice. And so I know there's, even on TV, you see expert witnesses, right? And like I've been on a jury trial, I've heard expert witnesses. When it comes to personal injury cases like this, when is it essential to involve them?
I like to say the sooner the better, because it's almost like a lawyer, right? You don't know when you're going to need one. So if you could gather that information, and right when we conduct the consultation, the first thing we do after a client has retained us is we start identifying what experts may be needed, right? What information will we need? Do we need to have a biomechanical engineer download the black box in the other vehicle or our client's vehicle? And we start that process from the jump, because that will kind of provide the roadmap as you continue. Oftentimes these cases take 6 months, a year, 2 years if it's going to get litigated. So, evidence could disappear. It could dissipate. So it's important to get that information early in an effort to try to preserve exactly what happened.
How does that even work? Do you have like a Rolodex filled with expert names, or how do you find these guys?
Yeah. So over time, you start to accumulate different experts, and ones that have done a good job. You kind of keep them on in your Palm Pilot, right? But there's also a lot of companies and vendors out there where these are the services that they offer, right? Their job is to provide the top experts across the nation to law firms based on different specialties, right? So if it's a brain injury, they may have the top neuroradiologists in the state or in the country. That you could go ahead and retain for your case. They may have the top engineer or, security expert, whatever it may be. But, through listservs, through the community, through these type of companies. So there's a lot of different ways to, investigate which experts may be good for your client's case.
Okay, and if I'm coming to you as a potential client of yours, you're going to handle that for me. I don't have to go out and find these people. Like that's what you're going to do for me.
That's correct. That's part of what lawyers do. We conduct the entire investigation. I like to tell my clients, I want you to worry about one thing and one thing only. That's treating and get it better.
I like that because that is the most important thing, and then you can handle all the rest of the stuff. I love it.
Correct.
So let's talk for a minute about technology. Obviously, technology has just exploded in the past, 5, 10, 20, 30, 50, however long you want to go back, years. And we have things now that we didn't have before, like digital evidence, social media posts, GPS data, even, cell phone records. How have those impacted personal injury cases?
Technology has been great. I would like for it to continue to advance in some respects. I know we got some concerns over AI and where some things may go, but I can tell you social media has been a great resource for us and our clients. The psychology, I mean, everybody thinks that they have to post their entire life to social media. And oftentimes there's no exception to that rule when it comes to someone being involved in an auto accident. So oftentimes, we will conduct an investigation and we search Instagram and these TikToks, and, we type in the defendant's name or the at-fault drivers, and you'll be surprised the type of things that we find, right? The different statements that they make right after an accident. Sometimes they even video the accident, right? Kind of incriminating themselves and, didn't know that they were incriminating themselves, or, just doing something to diminish their credibility, based upon what happened. So technology has been great. I can tell you, we know Tesla is in the news for a lot of things right now, right? But one thing that has been great about Teslas is they have the cameras on their vehicles. Right. And we have quite a few clients who have Teslas, and that's been great because it's capturing their surveillance in real time, which is not very common in our space. Right. In Clark County and the state of Nevada, we have recorders or cameras on top of lights. However, they do not record. They're just live feeds. And we're trying to get that changed because that would help us at intersections determine who was at fault and not have to rely on, the statements. We would actually have a video of it. So between dash cams and, Tesla's kind of capturing these videos in real time, right when the accident happens, 10, 15 seconds before, 10, 15 seconds after, that type of technology has really been an asset to our space and sometimes a detriment.
Yeah.
But truth comes out.
Yeah, I can see how that could be incredibly impactful to, a personal injury case. I didn't even know that about Tesla. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
So Jared, I just want to say thanks as we wrap up. Just thanks for coming on today, giving us of your wisdom and your knowledge. Really appreciate you, man.
Thank you for having me, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And so to our audience, thanks for tuning in to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond with C. Jared Clark. To connect with the team, head to injuryattorneyvegas.com. And as always, like, subscribe, and leave a review. And I hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good one. Enjoy your day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.